Ambassador Sarah Chen stepped onto the crystalline platform of Zephyros Prime, her diplomatic immunity badge gleaming against her formal Navy uniform. The air tasted of copper and ozone, typical of worlds where the Veltar Consortium held dominion. Beside her, her daughter Elena adjusted her translator device, eyes wide with wonder at the alien architecture that spiraled impossibly high into the purple-tinged sky. The Veltar delegation awaited them at the base of the spire of Accord, their serpentine forms coiled with what humans had learned to interpret as ceremonial patience. Their scales shifted colors in patterns that conveyed complex emotions and social hierarchies. High Coordinator Sethvar, distinguished by his crimson and gold markings, slithered forward with deliberate grace. Ambassador Chen, his voice resonated through the translator with mechanical precision. We welcome you to our sacred world. Your proposal for the mining rights in the Kepler sector has generated considerable discussion among our council. Sarah nodded respectfully, well aware that discussion among the Veltar could mean anything from mild interest to violent disagreement. The Kepler sector contained rare quantum crystals essential for humanity's faster-than-light communications network. Without them, human colonies would become isolated islands in the vast ocean of space. Elena, barely 18 and brilliant beyond her years, served as Sarah's cultural liaison. Her doctoral thesis on xenobiological communication patterns had impressed even the most seasoned diplomats. She stepped forward now, offering the traditional Veltar greeting by extending her palms upward. Honored Coordinator, Elena said, her pronunciation of the alien language flawless. We bring gifts of knowledge and partnership, hoping to weave our civilizations together like the great tapestries of the cosmic web. Several Veltar observers shifted their scales to deeper hues, indicating surprise and appreciation. Humans rarely spoke their ceremonial dialect with such fluency. Sethvar's own scales brightened with what could be interpreted as pleasure. The young one speaks with wisdom beyond her seasons, he acknowledged. Come, the council awaits in the Chamber of Infinite Echoes. There, we shall determine if your species proves worthy of our crystalline treasures. As they moved through the alien city, Elena documented everything with her neural implant, sending data streams back to Earth's Xenocultural Institute. The Veltar architecture defied human understanding of physics, with buildings that seemed to flow like liquid metal while maintaining perfect structural integrity. Gardens of bioluminescent organisms created living murals that told stories spanning millennia. The Chamber of Infinite Echoes lived up to its name. Sound bounced and amplified in ways that created an almost musical quality to spoken words. The council consisted of 12 Veltar, each representing different aspects of their society: military, science, philosophy, commerce, and others whose roles humans could only guess at. Sarah presented humanity's case with practiced eloquence. The mining rights would be limited and carefully regulated. Human technology could enhance Veltar crystal cultivation techniques. Both species would benefit from expanded trade relationships. She offered scientific exchanges, cultural programs, and significant compensation in rare earth metals. The debate that followed stretched for hours. Veltar spoke in overlapping harmonies, their scales creating a constantly shifting light show of meaning. Elena translated the nuances that standard diplomatic software missed, whispering insights about subtle threats and hidden alliances within the council's dynamics. As the formal session concluded, Coordinator Sethvar approached them privately. His scales had darkened to deep purples and blacks, indicating serious concern. Ambassador Chen, he said, there are those among us who view your species with suspicion. Humans expand rapidly, consume resources voraciously, and have a disturbing tendency toward violence when denied what they desire. Some council members believe granting you access to our crystals would be unwise. Sarah felt Elena tense beside her but maintained her diplomatic composure. Coordinator, humanity seeks partnership, not domination. We understand the concerns about our past, but we've evolved beyond our primitive origins. Perhaps, Sethvar replied, but evolution can be reversed under sufficient pressure. The council will deliberate tonight. Tomorrow we will provide our answer. Until then, you are our honored guests. I do hope you will remain so. The implied threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. As they were escorted to their quarters in the diplomatic complex, Elena walked closer to her mother, her earlier wonder replaced by growing unease. Mom, she whispered. Their ceremonial language contains threat structures I've never seen before. They're not just debating the mining rights. They're debating whether humanity should be eliminated as a potential threat. Sarah's blood chilled, but she kept her expression neutral. Their rooms were certainly monitored, and any sign of panic would only confirm Veltar's suspicions about human volatility. She placed a comforting hand on Elena's shoulder while her mind raced through contingency plans. The diplomatic complex overlooked the Veltar's most sacred site, the Nexus Caverns, where their legendary guardian dragons slumbered. These massive creatures, supposedly capable of destroying entire fleets with their plasma breath, represented the ultimate expression of Veltar power. Seeing them now in the distance, their massive forms barely visible through the cavern's bioluminescent mists, Sarah understood why the Veltar felt confident enough to threaten humanity. That night, as Elena studied Veltar historical texts in their shared quarters, she made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden within ancient ceremonial documents were references to ritual sacrifice as the ultimate expression of dominance over inferior species. The text described how defeated enemies' offspring were offered to the guardian dragons as symbols of complete subjugation. Mom, Elena's voice trembled as she shared her findings. If they deny our request tomorrow, we might not be leaving this planet. At least not both of us. Sarah stared at the translated documents, her diplomatic training warring with her maternal instincts. They couldn't flee without proof of hostile intent, and such proof might come too late. All they could do was proceed with the negotiations and hope that humanity's reputation for resilience might give the Veltar pause. Outside their window, the guardian dragons stirred in their ancient caverns, as if sensing the momentous decision that awaited with the dawn. Dawn on Zephyros Prime painted the sky in shades of amber and violet, but the beauty was lost on Ambassador Chen as she prepared for what might be their final diplomatic session. Elena had spent the night cross-referencing historical patterns, and her findings painted an increasingly grim picture of Veltar interactions with species they deemed inferior. The Chamber of Infinite Echoes felt different this morning. Where yesterday the acoustics had created an almost musical quality, today they seemed ominous, as if the very walls anticipated violence. The 12 council members arranged themselves in their traditional circle, but their positioning had changed. The more militant members now held prominent positions, while those who had shown interest in human proposals were relegated to the outer ring. Coordinator Sethvar's scales displayed deep crimson patterns shot through with black. A combination Elena had learned indicated absolute authority, mixed with barely contained aggression. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of final judgment. Ambassador Chen of the Human Collective, he began, his voice echoing with ceremonial formality. The Council of Infinite Wisdom has reached its decision regarding your species' request for mining privileges in the Kepler sector. Sarah stood straight, every inch the professional diplomat despite the cold dread settling in her stomach. Elena remained beside her, tablet in hand, ready to record whatever came next for posterity. After extensive deliberation, Sethvar continued, we have concluded that humanity represents an unacceptable risk to galactic stability. Your species' history of violence, resource depletion, and territorial expansion demonstrates a fundamental incompatibility with civilized society. The words hit like physical blows, but Sarah maintained her composure. Coordinator, I must respectfully disagree with your assessment. Humanity has evolved significantly from our primitive origins. We seek partnership and mutual benefit. War Leader Kraxeth, his scales now displaying aggressive orange and red patterns, slithered forward. Partnership? He hissed. Your species has engaged in over 200 significant wars in the past millennium alone. You strip mine entire worlds and leave them barren. You multiply exponentially and consume everything in your path like a plague of locusts. Elena stepped forward, her youth and earnestness a stark contrast to the ancient beings surrounding them. Honored council members, those statistics fail to account for context and progression. Human conflicts have decreased by 90% over the past century, and our environmental restoration technologies now exceed our extraction rates. Science Prelate Vorthana's scales shifted to curious blue-green patterns. The young one speaks with surprising knowledge, yet knowledge without wisdom can be dangerous. How do we know your species will not revert to its violent tendencies when resources become scarce? Because, Elena replied with passionate conviction, Humanity's greatest strength has always been our adaptability. We learn from our mistakes and overcome seemingly impossible challenges. Our history isn't just about conflict, it's about cooperation, sacrifice, and the determination to become better than we were. The council members exchanged complex scale pattern communications that Elena's expertise couldn't fully decode. The discussion went on for nearly an hour, with various factions debating in their harmonic language while the humans waited in tense silence. Finally, Sethvar raised himself to his full, imposing height. "The council has spoken. Your request for mining rights is denied. Furthermore, humanity will be quarantined to your current territories. Any attempt to expand beyond the Sol-adjacent sectors will be met with decisive action." Sarah felt her heart stop. Quarantine meant the eventual stagnation and death of human civilization. Without access to new resources and worlds, humanity would be trapped in an ever-shrinking bubble of space as their technology aged and their population outgrew their limited worlds. "This decision is unacceptable," Sarah said, her diplomatic mask finally cracking. "Humanity has rights under galactic law. We are a sovereign species with legitimate territorial claims." War leader Kraxith's scales flared to brilliant scarlet. "Rights? You speak of rights while your species pollutes the cosmic order with its very existence? There are no rights for those who threaten galactic stability." "And what of consequences?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. "Has the Council considered the ramifications of attempting to contain humanity through force?" The question seemed to amuse several Council members, their scales shifting to patterns Elena recognized as mocking humor. Kraxith actually produced what might have been laughter, a sound like grinding metal and breaking glass. "Child," he said with condescending cruelty, "your species is barely capable of interstellar travel. You have no significant military fleet, no allies among the civilized races, and no weapons that could threaten our guardian dragons. What possible consequences could there be?" Elena met his gaze steadily. "Coordinator, has your species ever studied human mythology? Our stories are filled with tales of small, seemingly powerless beings who topple giants through determination and ingenuity. David and Goliath, the mouse and the lion. Perhaps the Council should consider that size and power aren't always decisive factors." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Sethvar's scales shifted to the deep black patterns that Elena had learned indicated extreme displeasure. "Are you threatening us, young human?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm offering perspective," Elena replied calmly. "Humanity's history is filled with examples of our species achieving the impossible when our survival is threatened. We've survived ice ages, global wars, planetary disasters, and our own worst impulses. We adapt, we endure, and we find ways to overcome obstacles that should have destroyed us." Philosophy. Keeper Zenith spoke for the first time, his scales displaying ancient gold patterns. "The young one speaks of survival, but survival alone is not civilization. What of wisdom? What of restraint? Your species lacks both." "Then teach us," Sarah interjected, seizing on a possible opening. "If the Council believes humanity lacks wisdom, help us develop it. Partnership doesn't require equality. It requires mutual benefit and the willingness to grow." The debate continued, but Elena could see from the Council members' body language that their minds were already made up. The scales patterns were growing more aggressive, more final. When Sethvar finally called for the formal vote, the result was inevitable. "By a count of 10-2, he announced, "the Council decrees that humanity shall be contained within its current borders. Any violation of this quarantine will result in military action." Sarah straightened, drawing on decades of diplomatic experience to maintain her dignity in defeat. "Very well. I request immediate transport back to human space to relay this decision to my government." Kraxith's scales shifted to what Elena now recognized as predatory satisfaction. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Ambassador. You see, containing your species requires ensuring that no intelligence regarding our capabilities or the location of our strategic resources reaches human command. You will remain here as our guests." The word guests carried the unmistakable weight of prisoners. Elena felt the walls of the chamber closing in around them, but she forced herself to remain calm. Her mother had taught her that diplomacy wasn't just about success. It was about maintaining dignity and principle even in defeat. And what of galactic law regarding diplomatic immunity? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Galactic law, Sethvar replied with cold finality, applies only to civilized species. The Council has determined that humanity falls short of that standard. 3 days passed in what the Veltar called contemplative confinement. Sarah and Elena remained in their quarters under constant guard, their communications equipment confiscated, their movements restricted to a small section of the diplomatic complex. Elena used the time to study every piece of Veltar cultural information she could access, searching desperately for some precedent or tradition that might save them. What she found instead was worse than she had feared. "Mom," Elena whispered as they sat together in their monitored room, "I've been analyzing the ceremonial texts they've allowed me to read. There's a pattern here. A ritual that the Veltar perform when they want to demonstrate absolute dominance over another species." Sarah looked up from her own futile attempts to find diplomatic solutions. "What kind of ritual?" Elena's face had gone pale. "They call it the offering of submission. When the Veltar defeat a species they consider potentially dangerous, they select the offspring of the enemy leadership and present them to their guardian dragons as a living sacrifice. It's meant to demonstrate that the defeated species is so completely broken that they cannot even protect their own children." The blood drained from Sarah's face. "You think they're planning to—" "I think that's exactly what they're planning," Elena confirmed. The texts describe how the ritual breaks the spirit of the defeated species so completely that they never again dare to challenge Veltar authority. It's psychological warfare taken to its most extreme conclusion. Sarah stood and began pacing the small room, her diplomatic training warring with her maternal instincts. "There has to be something we can do. Some protocol, some appeal to higher authority." "The Veltar are the higher authority in this sector," Elena said quietly, "and according to their law we're not even recognized as a civilized species anymore. We have no rights, no protections, no recourse." A soft chime announced an incoming visitor. The door dilated to reveal Coordinator Sethvar, flanked by 2 massive Veltar guards whose scales displayed the distinctive patterns of military caste. His own scales had taken on formal ceremonial coloring, deep purple with silver highlights that indicated he was acting in an official capacity. "Ambassador Chen," he said with mock courtesy, "the Council has decided to grant your species a final opportunity to demonstrate the wisdom and restraint we found lacking in your previous interactions." Sarah stepped forward, hope and dread warring in her chest. "What kind of opportunity?" "Tomorrow at the setting of our primary sun, your daughter will be presented to Vorthak, mightiest of our guardian dragons, as an offering of submission. If humanity truly possesses the wisdom and restraint we doubt, then you will accept this honor gracefully, understanding that one life given for the peace of countless millions is a fair exchange." Elena felt the room spin around her, but she forced herself to remain standing. "And if we refuse?" Sethavar's scales shifted to amused condescension. "Then we will know beyond doubt that your species is too savage and selfish to be allowed even the limited existence we have planned for them. The quarantine will become an extermination, carried out swiftly and efficiently." Sarah stepped protectively in front of her daughter. "You're talking about murdering an innocent girl to make a political point." "I am talking about preventing the eventual deaths of billions," Sethvar replied coldly. "Your species' expansion threatens the stability of our entire galactic sector. One death now prevents countless deaths later." Elena moved to stand beside her mother, drawing strength from years of study and a lifetime of being taught to face challenges with courage. "Coordinator, has your species considered that there might be other responses to this action? That humanity might not react with submission but with fury?" War Leader Kraxith slithered into the room behind Sethvar, his scales already displaying aggressive orange patterns. "Let them rage, child. Fury without power is merely noise. Your species lacks the military capability to threaten us, and after tomorrow's demonstration, they will lack the will." "You're wrong about humanity," Elena said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "We're not like other species you've encountered. When you threaten one of us, you threaten all of us. When you kill one of us unjustly, you make enemies of all of us." Kraxith's laughter filled the room like breaking glass. Brave words from someone who will not live to see if they prove true. "Tell me, young human, Do you truly believe your species will remember you when faced with extinction? Or will they trade your memory for survival? Elena met his alien gaze without flinching. They'll remember. And they'll come for you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Because that's what humans do. We remember our dead. And we never forgive those who murder our children. Sethvar's scales darkened with displeasure. Such defiance only confirms our assessment of your species' savage nature. Tomorrow's ceremony will proceed as planned. I suggest you spend your remaining time in reflection and prayer, if your primitive species practices such things. As the Veltar delegation prepared to leave, Elena called out one final time. Coordinator, before you go, might I ask about Vorthak? The texts speak of him as ancient beyond measure, older than your civilization itself. Has anyone ever asked what he thinks about being used as an executioner? Sethvar paused, his scales shifting to confused patterns. Vorthak is a guardian dragon. His purpose is to protect our people and our interests. Such questions are meaningless, are they? Elena asked. According to your own historical records, the guardian dragons existed long before the Veltar achieved civilization. They were here when your ancestors were still primitive creatures crawling in the mud. Don't you think beings that ancient might have their own perspectives on justice and honor? For the first time since their arrival, Elena saw genuine uncertainty in the coordinator's posture. His scales flickered between colors as if he couldn't quite decide how to process her question. The guardian dragons serve the Veltar, he said finally, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Their loyalty is absolute. Loyalty, perhaps, Elena replied, but what about judgment? What about wisdom? If they're truly as ancient and powerful as your legends claim, they must have seen countless species rise and fall. They must understand the difference between necessary action and petty cruelty. Kraxith moved aggressively toward Elena, his scales flaring bright red. Enough. You will not poison our sacred traditions with your human doubt and sophistry. But Sethvar held up a restraining appendage, his own scales still flickering with uncertainty. The ceremony will proceed as planned, he said slowly. Vorthak will receive his offering and humanity will learn the price of defying civilized order. After they left, Sarah collapsed into a chair, her diplomatic composure finally cracking completely. Elena, I'm so sorry. I've failed you. I've failed humanity. Elena knelt beside her mother, taking her hands. No, Mom, you did everything right. You followed protocol. You respected their customs. You offered them partnership instead of conquest. The failure isn't yours, it's theirs. They're so afraid of what humanity might become that they're willing to commit atrocities to prevent it. But what good does that do us now? Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face. Elena squeezed her mother's hands tightly. It means that when this is over, when humanity learns what happened here, they'll know it wasn't about justice or galactic stability. It was about fear, and once they understand that, once they realize that the Veltar are so terrified of human potential that they're willing to murder children to stop it. She paused, her eyes hardening with determination. Well, then humanity will finally understand just how dangerous they really think we are. The Nexus caverns stretched deep into the heart of Zephyros Prime, their bioluminescent walls pulsing with an ancient rhythm that predated the Veltar civilization by millions of years. As Elena was led down the winding path toward the ceremonial amphitheater, she marveled at the sheer age of the place. Crystalline formations jutted from the walls like frozen lightning, and the air itself seemed to hum with primal energy. She had spent her final night memorizing everything she could about guardian dragons, hoping to find some advantage, some possibility of survival. What she discovered was that very little was actually known about them, even by the Veltar themselves. They were older than recorded history, more intelligent than most sentient species, and possessed power that bordered on the mythical. Yet they had chosen to ally themselves with the Veltar, for reasons that remained unclear. Coordinator Sethvar led the ceremonial procession, his scales now displaying the deep ceremonial blues and silvers of high ritual. Behind him came the 12 council members, their scales creating a shifting rainbow of formal patterns. Elena walked in the center of the group, unbound but surrounded, her simple diplomatic uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate ceremonial garments of her captors. The ceremony we are about to conduct, Sethvar explained as they descended, has not been performed in over 3 centuries. The last species to require such demonstration was the Kethmori hegemony, who believed their crystalline technology made them invulnerable to conventional weapons. War leader Kraxeth's scales gleamed with savage satisfaction. They learned otherwise when their crown prince was fed to the Great Mother herself. Within a solar cycle, they had surrendered completely and accepted tributary status. Elena kept her expression neutral, but her mind raced. 3 centuries ago, but they spoke of it as if it were yesterday. How long did Veltar live? How many atrocities like this had they committed over their extended lifespans? The path opened into a vast natural amphitheater carved from living rock. At its center lay a circular platform surrounded by channels that glowed with the same bioluminescent energy as the walls. But it was what lay beyond the platform that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. Vorthak the Ancient was massive beyond anything the historical records had prepared her for. His body stretched nearly 200 meters from snout to tail, covered in scales that seemed to contain entire galaxies of swirling light. His head alone was larger than most spacecraft, and his eyes, ancient, intelligent, and utterly alien, held the weight of eons. But it was the intelligence in those eyes that struck Elena most forcefully. This was no mere beast or weapon. This was a being that had watched civilizations rise and fall, that had witnessed the birth and death of countless species. The records called him a guardian dragon. But looking at him now, Elena wondered if the Veltar truly understood what they had allied themselves with. Vorthak's massive head turned toward the approaching procession, and when he spoke, his voice resonated through both sound and something deeper, a vibration that seemed to touch the soul itself. Sethvar of the Twisted Paths, the dragon's voice rumbled like distant thunder. You bring me an offering that reeks of fear and desperation. Explain to me why you wake the Ancient One for such small prey. Sethvar's scales flickered with what Elena recognized as nervousness, though he tried to maintain his ceremonial composure. Great Vorthak, guardian of our people, we bring you the offspring of humanity's leadership as an offering of submission. Their species threatens the order we have built, and their defiance must be broken. Vorthak's enormous eyes fixed on Elena, and she felt as if every secret of her soul was being examined. The dragon's gaze held her for what felt like an eternity before he spoke again. This small creature threatens your order? How curious. Tell me, young human, what terrible weapons do your people possess that so frighten the Veltar? Elena found her voice, though standing before such an ancient and powerful being, made her feel like an insect addressing a mountain. We have no weapons that could threaten them, Great Vorthak. Our technology is centuries behind theirs. Our fleet is tiny compared to their armadas. Then what is it they fear? Vorthak's head tilted slightly, a movement that somehow conveyed vast amusement. Elena glanced at the Veltar delegation, seeing their scales shift to uncomfortable patterns. I think they fear our potential, our refusal to accept limitations, our tendency to grow and adapt and overcome obstacles that should be impossible. Vorthak's laughter was like an earthquake-given voice, a sound so deep and primal that it made the crystalline formations in the cavern walls ring like bells. Ah, now I begin to understand. They fear what you might become, not what you are. War leader Kraxeth slithered forward, his scales blazing with aggressive patterns. Great Vorthak, this delay serves no purpose. The ritual must be completed so that humanity learns the price of defying civilized order. The dragon's massive head swung toward Kraxeth with such speed that the war leader froze in terror. When Vorthak spoke, his voice carried the weight of barely controlled annoyance. You presume to tell me what must be done, little serpent? I have been guardian to your people since before your great-grandsires learned to shed their skins. I will not be lectured on duty by one who has seen barely 2 centuries. Kraxeth's scales immediately shifted to submissive pale colors, and he pressed himself low against the cavern floor. Forgive me, Ancient One. I meant no disrespect. Vorthak's attention returned to Elena, and she felt the full force of his ancient intellect focused on her. Tell me, small human, do you understand what they ask me to do? Elena met his gaze as steadily as she could. They want you to kill me to terrorize my people into submission. They believe that witnessing my death will break humanity's will to resist. And what do you believe? Elena took a deep breath, knowing that her next words might determine not just her fate, but the future relationship between humanity and the ancient powers of the galaxy. I believe they've made a terrible mistake. They think humanity is like other species they've encountered, that we can be broken through fear and intimidation. But they don't understand us. When you threaten a human's family, when you murder their children, you don't break their spirit. You forge it into something harder than any metal, sharper than any blade. Vorthak's eyes seemed to brighten with interest. Go on. My mother is Ambassador Sarah Chen, one of humanity's finest diplomats. She came here seeking partnership and mutual benefit. She followed every protocol, respected every custom, offered fair compensation for what we needed, and in return they condemned our entire species and sentenced me to death. Elena's voice grew stronger with each word. When humanity learns of this, they won't submit. They'll remember, and they'll make sure that everyone else in the galaxy remembers too. Memories fade, Setvar interjected, his scales displaying dismissive patterns. Fear endures. Elena turned to face him directly. No, Coordinator. You have it exactly backwards. Fear fades when the source of fear is removed. But memory of injustice, memory of murdered innocence, memory of promises broken and trust betrayed, that becomes legend. That becomes the foundation for movements that topple empires. Vorthak's massive head nodded slowly, a gesture so human-like that it startled everyone present. The young one speaks wisdom that your council seems to lack, Setvar. In my long existence, I have seen many species attempt to rule through fear. They all believed their power was absolute, their dominion eternal. And what became of them? Elena asked softly. They fell, Vorthak rumbled. Every single one. Because power built on fear and oppression carries the seeds of its own destruction. The question that remains is whether the Veltar have grown wise enough to recognize this truth, or whether they will follow the same path to ruin as their predecessors. The dragon's enormous form began to rise, his head lifting until it towered nearly 50 meters above the ceremonial platform. When he spoke again, his voice carried a finality that made the air itself seem to vibrate with power. I am Vorthak the Ancient, guardian of the Veltar, keeper of the sacred flames, witness to the rise and fall of empires. I have protected your people for 3 million years, guided them from primitive hunters to masters of the stars, and in all that time, I have never been asked to participate in the murder of innocents for the crime of possessing potential. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the cavern's bioluminescent energy. The cavern fell into absolute silence as Vorthak's words echoed through the ancient stone. Helena could feel the weight of cosmic history in those words, the accumulated wisdom of eons bearing down on this single moment. The Veltar delegation had frozen in place, their scales flickering between colors and patterns that spoke of confusion, fear, and dawning realization. Coordinator Setvar was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Great Vorthak, guardian of our people, surely you cannot mean to deny us this necessary ritual. The human threat, what threat? Vorthak's voice cut through the coordinator's words like a blade through silk. A species barely capable of interstellar travel, a people who sent diplomats instead of warships? Tell me, Setvar, when did the Veltar become so weak that they fear children? War leader Kraxeth attempted to slither forward, his scales still displaying submissive patterns but his voice carrying desperate conviction. Ancient One, their potential for growth is exponential. Given time, they could surpass us. Their historical records show they conquered their entire homeworld within mere millennia of achieving civilization. Vorthak's massive head swung toward the war leader with deliberate slowness. And how long did it take your ancestors to achieve interstellar flight? How many worlds did they conquer in their expansion across the galaxy? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Elena, despite her precarious situation, found herself fascinated by the dragon's interrogation of his supposed allies. That was different, Kraxeth stammered. We brought order and civilization to primitive worlds. We uplifted lesser species. After conquering them, Vorthak observed with cutting accuracy, after breaking their resistance and forcing them to accept your version of civilization. Tell me, war leader, how is human expansion fundamentally different from your own, except in scale and speed? Science prelate Vorthana attempted to provide support for her colleague. Great Vorthak, the humans show none of the restraint that marks truly civilized beings. They consume resources without regard for sustainability. They wage wars over ideological differences. They are young, Vorthak interrupted, his voice carrying the patience of eons. As were you once. As were all species when they first reached for the stars. The question is not whether they make mistakes, but whether they learn from them. Elena felt a surge of hope mixed with trepidation. The ancient dragon seemed to be defending humanity, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was all leading somewhere she couldn't predict. Great One, she said carefully. If I may ask, what do you see when you look at humanity? What do your ancient eyes perceive that others might miss? Vorthak's gaze fixed on her with an intensity that felt like standing in the beam of a star. I see a species standing at a crossroads. Young Elena Chen. One path leads to the sterile conformity that the Veltar would impose. Safety purchased with stagnation. Order maintained through suppression of potential. The other path leads into uncertainty, growth, change, and yes, mistakes and failures and pain. And which path do you believe we should take? Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The choice is not mine to make, Vorthak replied. It is yours. It has always been yours. But I can tell you this. In my 3 million years of existence, I have seen countless species face that same choice. Those who chose safety and stagnation are remembered only in ancient texts. Those who chose growth and change, who embraced their potential despite the risks. The dragon's voice took on a note of profound sadness. They burned bright enough to light the galaxy. Sethvar's scales had shifted to patterns of desperate authority. Ancient One, with all respect for your wisdom, the Council has made its decision. The ritual of submission must be completed to maintain order. Must it? Vorthak asked. And suddenly the cavern filled with an ominous energy that made Elena's hair stand on end. Tell me, Coordinator, do you command me or do I serve by choice? The distinction hit the Veltar delegation like a physical blow. Elena saw it in the way their scales shifted to pale, frightened colors, in the way they suddenly seemed to remember that they were in the presence of a being capable of reducing their entire civilization to ash. You serve by choice, Great Vorthak, Sethvar admitted reluctantly. As you have always served. Then hear my choice, the dragon declared, rising to his full, terrifying height. I choose not to participate in the murder of innocents. I choose not to break the young for the crimes they might commit in futures that may never come to pass. I choose not to help you transform fear into policy and policy into atrocity. War leader Kraxeth's composure finally shattered completely. You would choose them over us? Over your own people? Vorthak's response came with the force of a geological event, his voice making the entire cavern tremble. I choose justice over expedience. I choose courage over cowardice. I choose the path that leads to growth over the path that leads to decay. The dragon's massive form began to glow with an inner fire that cast dancing shadows across the cavern walls. For 3 million years I have protected the Veltar because I believed in their potential for wisdom and justice. I have watched them grow from primitive hunters to masters of technology and space. But somewhere in that growth they lost something essential, the courage to face uncertainty without resorting to murder. Elena felt tears on her cheeks, though she couldn't say whether they were from relief, sorrow, or the overwhelming presence of the ancient being before her. What happens now? She asked quietly. Vorthak's glowing eyes fixed on her with something that might have been affection. Now, young Elena Chen, you return to your people. You carry with you the knowledge of what transpired here, and the choice of what to do with that knowledge. The Council will never allow it, Sethvar protested, his scales now displaying desperate aggression. They will order the military to what? Vorthak asked with lethal quiet. Attack me? Attempt to force my compliance? 3 million years, Sethvar. 3 million years I have been the foundation upon which your civilization rests. Remove that foundation, and what do you think will happen to everything built upon it? The threat was implicit but absolute. Elena realized she was witnessing the end of an alliance that had shaped galactic politics for longer than human civilization had existed. Philosophy Keeper. Zenith spoke for the first time during the entire confrontation, his ancient voice filled with the weight of accumulated wisdom. Great Vorthak, if you withdraw your protection from us, what becomes of the Veltar? The dragon's response was gentler than Elena expected. That, old friend, depends on what you choose to become. You can continue down this path of fear and control, ruling through intimidation and murder. If you do, you will discover that power built on such foundations is far more fragile than you imagine. And the alternative? Zenith asked. Learn, Vorthak said simply. Grow. Accept that the galaxy is vast enough for many different kinds of civilization, many different approaches to existence. Stop trying to impose your vision of order on species who may have better ideas. Elena stepped forward, her diplomat's training finally asserting itself despite the surreal circumstances. Great Vorthak, what of the mining rights? What of the quarantine they've imposed on humanity? The dragon's massive head tilted in what might have been amusement. Those decisions were made by the Council, young one. They are the Council's to unmake. All eyes turned to Coordinator Sethvar, whose scales had shifted through a dozen different patterns in the span of a few heartbeats. Elena could see the calculations running behind his alien features, the weight of 3 million years of protection balanced against his fear of human potential. "The mining rights," he said finally, his voice barely audible, "will be granted under standard galactic trade agreements. The quarantine?" He paused, his scales flickering with what Elena had learned to recognize as profound internal conflict. "The quarantine is rescinded." Elena felt a wave of relief so intense it nearly knocked her off her feet, but Vorthak wasn't finished. "And the young diplomat's mother?" the dragon inquired with deceptive mildness. "Will be returned safely to human space," Sethvar confirmed, with our apologies for the misunderstanding. Elena knew it was more than a misunderstanding, much more, but she also understood that sometimes diplomacy required accepting graceful retreats rather than demanding total victory. The journey back to human space aboard the Veltar diplomatic vessel was surreal in its normalcy. After the cosmic drama of Vorthak's intervention, the simple act of sitting in a passenger cabin reviewing official documents felt almost anticlimactic. Yet Elena found herself studying every detail of their departure, knowing that these memories would shape humanity's understanding of what had transpired. Ambassador Sarah Chen had been returned to them within hours of Vorthak's pronouncement, confused but unharmed. The Veltar had maintained the fiction that she had been in protective custody rather than imprisoned, though the haunted look in her eyes suggested she understood exactly how close they had all come to disaster. "They're terrified," Sarah observed as they watched Zephyros Prime shrink in the viewport. "I've been in diplomatic service for 30 years, and I've never seen a species so fundamentally shaken by a single conversation." Elena nodded, still processing the magnitude of what they had witnessed. They've structured their entire civilization around the protection of beings they never really understood. When Vorthak withdrew that protection, even temporarily, it forced them to confront how vulnerable they actually are. The Veltar crew maintained professional courtesy throughout the journey, but Elena noticed the subtle signs of a civilization in crisis. Conversation stopped when humans approached. Scale patterns flickered with constant anxiety. The ship's routine protocols were executed with the mechanical precision of people trying to maintain normalcy, while their world crumbled around them. Captain Velthresh, a middle-aged Veltar with the bearing of a career military officer, approached them on the second day of their journey. His scales displayed the formal patterns of official communication, but Elena could see the underlying uncertainty in their shifting hues. "Ambassador Chen," he said carefully, "I have been instructed to ask about humanity's intentions regarding the Kepler sector mining rights. The Council wishes to establish formal agreements as quickly as possible." Sarah exchanged a glance with Elena before responding. "Captain, we came seeking partnership and mutual benefit. Nothing has changed in that regard. We're still interested in establishing positive trade relationships with the Veltar." Relief was evident in the captain's scale patterns. "That is welcome news. There have been concerns about potential retaliation for the misunderstandings that occurred." Elena leaned forward slightly. "Captain, if I may ask, how much do you know about what happened in the Nexus caverns?" Velthresh's scales shifted to uncomfortable patterns. "Enough to understand that the great Vorthak was displeased with certain council decisions. The full details have not been shared with ship personnel." "But you know he withdrew his protection," Elena pressed gently. "Temporarily," the captain emphasized quickly. "A temporary disagreement over policy. These things happen in any long alliance." Elena could see that the captain was desperately trying to maintain the fiction that nothing fundamental had changed, but his scale patterns betrayed his true feelings. The Veltar had built their entire strategic doctrine around the assumption of Guardian Dragon support. Without it, they were just another mid-level civilization in a galaxy full of ambitious species. "What happens to the Veltar now?" Sarah asked with genuine concern. "Your people have been major players in galactic politics for millennia. Surely temporary tensions with your guardians won't change that overnight." Velthresh was quiet for a long moment. His scales cycling through complex patterns that Elena had learned indicated deep thought. "I served on the frontier worlds during the Keth Mori hegemony crisis," he said finally. "I saw what happened when the Guardian Dragons displayed their power. Entire fleets surrendered rather than face them. But I also saw how quickly other species moved to fill power vacuums when they sensed weakness. The implications hung heavy in the air. Elena realized that humanity's narrow escape from tragedy might have triggered a much larger galactic crisis. Has the Council considered reaching out to other species for support? Sarah asked diplomatically. The hegemony of Altair has already sent exploration fleets to the edge of our space, Velthresh admitted. The Crystalline Collective has begun questioning existing trade agreements. Even the normally peaceful Verdant Federation has been asking pointed questions about territorial boundaries. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. They're circling like vultures. They sense weakness and they're moving to exploit it. Which is why, Velthresh continued, the Council is so eager to establish positive relationships with humanity. Your species may be young, but you've demonstrated impressive potential. Sarah nearly choked on her drink. Are you saying the Veltar want humanity as an ally? I'm saying, the captain replied carefully, that the galaxy is about to become a much more dangerous place for species without strong friends. The rest of the journey passed in careful diplomatic conversations as both sides began to explore possibilities that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Elena found herself in the strange position of helping to negotiate humanity's emergence as a galactic power, all because an ancient dragon had refused to murder her for political expediency. When they finally reached the edge of human space, Elena stood at the viewport watching their escort of human patrol ships approach. The vessels looked almost primitive compared to Veltar technology. But she had learned that technological superiority meant nothing if you lacked the will to use it. Effectively, Admiral Harrison's weathered face filled the communication screen as their ship docked with the human space station. His expression showed the strain of someone who had been dealing with a diplomatic crisis without knowing whether his ambassador and her daughter were alive or dead. Ambassador Chen, he said with obvious relief. We're damn glad to see you both. When the Veltar announced they were reconsidering the mining rights negotiations, we feared the worst. Sarah smiled grimly. Admiral, we have a lot to discuss. The situation is more complex than anyone realized. Over the next several hours, Elena and her mother provided a complete briefing on everything that had transpired. Admiral Harrison's expression grew increasingly grim as they described the Council's decision to quarantine, humanity and the planned ritual, execution. They were going to murder Elena to terrorize us into submission, he asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. That was the plan, Elena confirmed, but Vorthak refused to participate. This dragon, Harrison said slowly, he saved your life because he believed it was wrong. More than that, Elena replied. He saved my life because he understood what would happen if he didn't. He's lived long enough to see how cycles of violence and oppression play out. He knew that murdering me wouldn't break humanity's spirit, it would forge it into something much more dangerous to the Veltar. Admiral Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. And now they want to be our allies. They want to survive, Sarah corrected. The Guardian Dragons were the foundation of their power, and that foundation has been shaken. They're reaching out to humanity because they need friends, not because they've suddenly developed respect for us. Elena felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and concern. Humanity had won a victory, but it was a victory that came with enormous responsibilities. What happens next? She asked. Admiral Harrison's smile was sharp as a blade. Next, we show the galaxy what humans are really capable of when someone threatens our children. 6 months after Elena Chen's return from Zephyros Prime, the galaxy had become a very different place. The Human Diplomatic Corps released a carefully worded statement detailing the Veltar Council's attempted execution of a diplomatic miner and the intervention of the guardian dragon Vorthak. The response was immediate and far-reaching. Elena stood in the observation deck of the newly commissioned Dreadnought Resilience, watching as the massive vessel prepared to depart for the Kepler sector. Around them, a fleet of human ships stretched as far as the eye could see, not warships but colony vessels, mining platforms, research stations, and defensive platforms. It was the largest human expansion effort in history, and it was heading straight for what had once been exclusively Veltar space. The Council really thought they could scare us into submission, Admiral Harrison observed, joining Elena at the viewport. His uniform now bore the insignia of Fleet Admiral, a promotion that had come with humanity's sudden emergence as a major galactic power. Elena nodded, still amazed by how quickly everything had changed. They fundamentally misunderstood human nature. They thought fear would make us smaller. Instead, it made us realize how much bigger we needed to become. The numbers were staggering. In the months following the incident, human recruitment for space services had increased by 3,000%. The Colonial Development Authority had received funding requests for over 200 New World settlements. Most significantly, 12 different human corporations had announced plans to establish permanent research and mining operations in the Kepler sector. "Have you heard from your Veltar friends lately?" Harrison asked with dry amusement. Elena pulled up her personal communicator, displaying the latest message from Captain Velthresh. "They're getting desperate. The Altair hegemony has claimed 3 systems that the Veltar considered their sphere of influence. The Crystalline Collective has established mining operations in 2 more. Without the Guardian Dragons actively protecting their interests, everyone is treating them like a declining power. And humanity? We're treating them like the business partners they should have been from the beginning," Elena replied. "Fair trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, cultural exchange programs, everything they could have had if they'd just asked instead of threatening." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. By attempting to contain humanity through fear, the Veltar had triggered exactly the kind of explosive expansion they had been trying to prevent. But unlike the savage conquest they had expected, humanity's growth was methodical, legal, and conducted in partnership with dozens of other species. Elena's mother approached from across the observation deck, carrying a datapad with the latest diplomatic reports. Ambassador Sarah Chen had been promoted to Director of Interspecies Relations, overseeing humanity's rapidly expanding network of galactic partnerships. "The Verdant Federation has agreed to the research partnership," Sarah announced. "They'll provide biological expertise for terraforming projects in exchange for human engineering support for their deep space habitats. That makes 17 species in the coalition," Elena noted. 18 if you count the Veltar protectorates that have been asking for separate trade agreements." Sarah's expression grew serious. "Elena, I've been meaning to ask. Have you given any thought to the Galactic Council's invitation?" Elena had been trying not to think about it. The Galactic Council, the closest thing the galaxy had to a unified government, had formally invited humanity to join as a full member species. It was an honor that typically took millennia to achieve, and it had been offered just 6 months after the Veltar incident. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of responsibility," Elena admitted. 6 months ago I was a graduate student. Now they're talking about making me humanity's youngest Galactic Council representative." Admiral Harrison chuckled. "Elena, you faced down an ancient dragon and convinced him to spare your life through pure diplomatic skill. I think you can handle a bunch of politicians." "That's just it," Elena replied. "Vorthak wasn't a politician. He was something far more dangerous, a being with genuine principles. Politicians you can negotiate with, compromise with, find common ground. But when you're dealing with someone who has absolute power and genuine convictions about right and wrong," she shuddered slightly. "I got lucky that his convictions aligned with justice." Sarah placed a comforting hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You didn't get lucky, Elena. You understood him better than the Veltar ever did, despite their 3-million-year alliance. You recognized that power without wisdom is ultimately self-defeating, and you helped him see that humanity represents potential rather than threat." Through the viewport, they could see the first of the colony ships beginning their jump to faster-than-light travel. Each ship carried thousands of humans eager to build new homes among the stars. Protected by defensive fleets that had been built in record time, once humanity understood the true nature of galactic politics. "What do you think Vorthak is doing now?" Elena asked, watching the colony ships disappear into the cosmic distance. Admiral Harrison accessed his secure communication channel and pulled up the latest intelligence reports. "According to our contacts in Veltar space, he's been meeting with the other Guardian Dragons. Apparently, they've been having some very serious conversations about their role in galactic affairs." Elena felt a chill of anticipation. "All of them? How many Guardian Dragons are there?" "That's classified," Harrison replied. "But let's just say that if they decide to withdraw their protection from all their client species simultaneously, the entire galactic power structure could collapse overnight." Sarah pulled up a star chart showing the current political situation. Red zones marked areas of active conflict, where previously stable alliances had fallen apart. Yellow zones indicated regions of political uncertainty. Green zones showed areas where new partnerships were forming, often with human involvement. The galaxy is reshaping itself, she observed. Species that relied on guardian dragon protection for millennia are suddenly having to forge new alliances, develop their own defensive capabilities, or accept tributary status to stronger neighbors. And humanity is right in the middle of it all, Elena added. 6 months ago, we were barely a footnote in galactic politics. Now we're being courted by major powers and invited to join the Galactic Council. Admiral Harrison's expression grew serious. Which brings us to the real question. What kind of galactic power does humanity want to be? Do we follow the Veltar model and rule through fear and intimidation? Do we build an empire like the Altair hegemony? Or do we try something different? Elena thought about Vorthak's words in the ancient cavern, about the choice between safety and growth, between stagnation and potential. We try something different, she said finally. We show the galaxy that power doesn't have to come from fear, that cooperation can be stronger than conquest, that protecting the weak doesn't make you weak, it makes you worthy of protection. Easier said than done, Sarah warned. There are already voices in the Human Council calling for preemptive strikes against potential threats. Some people think we should take advantage of the chaos to grab as much territory as possible. Elena nodded, understanding the challenge. That's exactly what the Veltar expected us to do. They thought we were fundamentally violent and acquisitive. If we prove them right, we validate everything they believed about humanity. And if we prove them wrong? Harrison asked. Elena smiled, remembering the ancient dragon's words about species that burned bright enough to light the galaxy. Then we become something new, something the galaxy has never seen before, a major power that actually deserves the trust that others place in it. Through the viewport, more colony ships were beginning their journeys to the stars, carrying not just human settlers but representatives from a dozen different species who had chosen to join humanity's expansion rather than fight it. It was unprecedented in galactic history, a major expansion conducted through partnership rather than conquest. The Veltar made one critical mistake, Elena said as she watched the ships disappear into the cosmic distance. They assumed that because humans were young and aggressive, we were incapable of wisdom and growth. They forgot that the most dangerous quality humans possess isn't our capacity for violence, it's our capacity for change. 6 months earlier, Elena had stood in an ancient cavern facing death while an empire decided her species' fate. Now she stood on the bridge of a human dreadnought, watching as humanity took its first steps toward becoming the kind of civilization that earned respect rather than demanded it. The galaxy would never be the same, and for the first time since leaving Zephyros Prime, Elena was certain that was a good thing.